I'm Patricia, and this is Investigating Vegan Life with Patricia Kathleen. This series features interviews and conversations I conduct with experts from food and fashion to tech and agriculture, from medicine and science to health and humanitarian arenas. Our inquiry is an effort to examine the variety of industries and lifestyle tenets in the world of vegan life. To that end, we will cover topics that have revealed themselves as common and integral when exploring veganism. The dialogue captured here is part of our ongoing effort to host transparent and honest rhetoric for those of you who, like myself, find great value in hearing the expertise and opinions of individuals who have dedicated their work and lives to their ideals. You can find information about myself and my podcast at patriciakathleen.com. Welcome to Investigating Vegan Life. Now let's start the conversation. Hi everyone, and welcome back. I'm your host, Patricia, and today I'm elated to be sitting down with Kristin. Lajeunesse. She is an author and marketing and copywriting specialist. You can find out more about everything we talk about today at on our website, WTFveganfood.com. That stands for Will Travel for Veganfood.com. Again, the address is WTFveganfood.com. Welcome, Kristin.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm excited to kind of unpack everything you're doing. I was telling you off the air just now that I find what you did with Will Travel for Vegan Food audacious and inspiring. And so I'm excited to unpack that, as well as what you're currently doing with copywriting and marketing. For everyone listening, I'm going to give you a quick roadmap of today's podcast prior to reading Kristin's bio, and then I'll start peppering her with all of our questions and inquiries. A quick roadmap. We're first going to look at Kristin's academic, occupational, and career experience prior to launching her endeavors with Will Travel for Vegan Food. And then we'll kind of unpack the personal vegan story and how it played into her starting the journey and the experience of Will Travel for Vegan Food, which we'll kind of unpack with her in that time period. And then we'll wrap everything up with her current endeavors and what she's doing with marketing and copywriting, and how she's still kind of tying in all of her voice of the vegan community into that. A quick bio is promised on Kristin. Kristin Lajeunesse is a published author and founder of the award-winning website Will Travel for Vegan Food, based on a 2-year van-dwelling excursion that took her through all 50 states in the United States and an 8-month-long around-the-world trip. In January 2011, Kristin quit her 9-to-5 desk job in an effort to eat at every single vegan restaurant in the country. Kristin continued to travel full-time for 8 consecutive years while building her business from all over the world. Kristin has a Master of Arts in Integrated Marketing Communication from Emerson College. You can follow Kristin's travel excursions at WTFveganfood.com on Instagram, and her dancer meets copywriter business at Kristin Laj on Instagram. And so, Kristin, I want you to unpack everything that you're doing and kind of drop your handles as necessary for everyone listening and wanting to follow you. I certainly think people will want to. But before we get into Will Travel for Vegan Food and what kind of led you to that endeavor, can you lead us up to your history in academics and your career expectations up until that time?
Sure. So this is something I actually don't get to talk about so much when I talk about my vegan travels, which is what was life like before all of this?
Yeah.
And it surprises a lot of people to learn that I was on a path to be a horse trainer. I had actually gone to undergrad for equestrian studies, and business management was the degree. And I had started riding horses competitively from the time I was 8 years old on through college. So I was on this kind of lifelong path of, I'm going to own a training facility, I'm going to give lessons, I'm going to train horses. And then as I was wrapping up some internships and finishing college, I started developing an interest in marketing and more business development, but also learning more about animal welfare, the treatment of animals, and we can talk about the going vegan journey at some point mixed in there too. But academically speaking, after finishing undergrad, I decided I wanted to go to grad school. And I didn't really know what that was going to look like. I just knew I kind of enjoyed some marketing things. So I started poking around some integrated programs that brought together different pieces of the marketing world, like PR, brand management, customer relationship management, all of these things. And I landed on the graduate program at Emerson College. That was a 2-year program in Boston. And immediately after that, I was fortunate. At the time, we had hit a recession when I was graduating from grad school, and I was fortunate enough to land a full-time role at a nonprofit animal welfare organization at the time. So I was with that organization in their communications department for about a year and a half before I decided I wanted a different life and that I wanted to maybe live in a van and travel for a while. So that's the brief summary of my pre-van dwelling days.
Yeah, I love it. So when it sounds like I can kind of sniff out like the vegan journey is happening sometime between the equestrian studies and the advent of the postgraduate school nonprofit. How was your journey slow? Was it overnight? It seems to be one or the other with people. You know, it's either this like long journey that snaps one day overnight, or it's just this wake up call.
Yeah, in reflection, it was actually a little bit of both, mostly because when I was 16, my parents sat me down and said they wanted to become vegetarian together as a family. And this was sparked by my older brother, who had returned from following the band Fish around the country, PHISH for those of you who know Fish, following them around the US and came back, had lots of tattoos and dreadlocks, and declared his vegetarianism. And my parents were mortified that he was going to die. So they did a bunch of research and decided that, oh, perhaps this is actually a healthier way of living. And I'm really close with my parents. So when they proposed this idea, I was like, oh, sure, yeah, I'll go along with it, whatever. And then I had gone off to college and I remained vegetarian for 8 years beyond that point. But I never did much independent research on it. I just knew from that day forward, I didn't eat certain things or only ate whatever, certain things. So then it was toward the tail end, it was a year or two after I finished undergrad that my parents had made their way to veganism. They started going to a bunch of festivals in upstate New York, where I'm from, and all around the Northeast. And I think for proximity of meeting other vegans and learning more about the dairy side of animal agriculture, that they became vegan. And I remember thinking that they were crazy. I would go home from school break and see like soy milk in the fridge, and I was thinking, what are they doing? This is nuts. And then it was about 2 years after they started their vegan journey that I went to an event in Syracuse, New York, where I was living at the time. And I listened to a dietitian talk about dairy, and specifically the farming industry, and also how dairy impacts our bodies and the environmental impact of the farming industry. And it kind of all hit me in that moment. And that's where the overnight shift happened. Like I was on this 8-year-long vegetarian journey, and didn't question too many things. And then it was kind of between my parents' subtle messaging when they became vegan, and then finally hearing it from outside of my, familial circle of someone with influence saying, this is why we need to pay attention to dairy. And that was at the end of August 2006 that I became vegan. So yeah, it's been almost 14 years vegan, and then tacked on 8 years of vegetarian before that.
It's a long time. You are the very first person in my entire history, and I'm talkative, and I've been vegan for the better part of 9 years. So not as long as you, but nothing too shabby. And I have spoken to people long before that about the lifestyle and everything else. You're the very first person I have ever talked to whose parents went vegan before she did. Yes. That is absolutely astronomically insane. I love it. That is such a great, and you sound like the parent in that parody, like that. You're like, what's happening? Why is there soy milk in your fridge? Like all of it is such a reversal of roles. Do you hear that a lot?
All the time. Yes. Of course, after, traveling so much and meeting other vegans, it's still to this day. I think I've met a couple of vegans that were raised vegan from birth or from very young age. But other than that, I am among the few lucky ones who had parents that I like to say that they're always way ahead of me. Like they're way cooler than I am. They're always like on the trendy side of things, you know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm very lucky that they're super hip.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. I'm glad that they're alive. I'm glad that we have people like that in this world walking amongst us. We need that. So it's a cool journey. It's a longer one, like you said. I get what you're saying, where it's longer and then brief all of a sudden. So, but it still doesn't answer to this very quick. I imagine maybe you had more support than a lot of people would have, but this decision to leave this postgraduate, you know, in a recession, as you said, landing a job, very few people during that time period having safety, and deciding you were going to crowdsource and up and do this. Where did the idea come from? I feel like it was a dream or a vision you had, because it's so specific. How did you come into this endeavor, and how long did it take you to actually execute it, like to crowdsource and just get going?
It was created off the heels of an obsession that I started around learning from people that were calling themselves lifestyle designers. So there was this phase of like the Tim Ferrisses and the Chris Guillebeaus of the world, also around when Marie Forleo was up and coming, that kind of this group of online influential types who were published authors that were talking about like, oh, design your life around your greatest passions. And I was kind of really absorbed in their blogs and reading their books. And I also started dabbling in my own business endeavors, even though I had this full-time job. I had started I had built my first website, and it was like a vegan wedding website. I mean, I've never been married or engaged, but I was like, what's something that doesn't exist yet? Oh,
Nice.
a resource for vegan people that want to get married. And so I started putting together, like creating this website, selling ads on it. That was my first kind of self-employed business endeavor. So I was doing that on the side, reading about these personal development lifestyle people. And one afternoon on a lunch break from work, I was reading a chapter from The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, and closed the book, went back to my desk. And when I sat down, the words "will travel for vegan food" just kind of appeared in front of my brain. And it was like a spark. I knew in that moment what I wanted to do. And I emailed my parents right away from my work desk. And I said, you guys, I have the best idea. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to move into a van, and I'm going to try to eat at every vegan restaurant in the country. Because look, and also in the back of my mind had been simmering, you know, this question of if I could do whatever I wanted, what would that look like? And I thought, I mean, I fell in love with food after becoming vegan. I was never really a foodie or conscious of what I was eating before my vegan days. So that was something that was developing. And at the time that the idea had landed, I was vegan for maybe 5 years or so. And then, and I had also thought, oh, I want to travel a bit more, because up until that point, I had been to a few other states in the country, and I think maybe to Canada once or twice. So not a lot of traveling, and I think those two things were simmering in the back of my mind for a while as I was reading this content from these amazing people that were doing cool things. And so, yeah, at work one day, the words came to me. I emailed my parents, and of course, you know, it kind of was like, oh, cool idea. Like they've never thought it was actually going to be a thing. But as soon as that idea came to me, I could not stop thinking about it. I think within the week, I secured the domain and the social media handles. At the time, I think maybe just Facebook, Instagram didn't exist yet. But I was like, this could be something, you know? And after I gave it some more thought, I would say it was probably within 6 to 8 months that I had decided I was going to really make a go of it. And within that time period, I gave my notice at work, started the crowdfunding campaign. And there was this interesting thing that happened, which I think is what made this specific project so pivotal for me in my own emotional development, was when the idea landed and when I decided I wanted to do it, there was no question that like I could and would do it. It was like this matter-of-fact feeling of this like deep intuitive knowing that I needed to do this project. And it was probably one of the first notable times in my life that I remember thinking like, this is what I need to do right now. So, so yeah, it kind of came in a flash. I right away was convinced, I convinced myself it would happen. And then I started taking kind of the micro steps, and it was within a year from the idea when it came to me to when I was pulling out of my parents' driveway in a van that I found on Craigslist and renovated with my dad a week prior.
Amazing. I mean, yeah, it's manifesting at its very finest, right? It doesn't matter. You don't have to be a Ferris. I own 4 Hour Work Week, FYI. I think I bought it the year it came out. So I was along that same trajectory in that, like a lot of those guys about like, this is pre The Secret. People have to remember. It was like before people were talking about manifesting. You know, it was along the same lines of like, get it done. And it doesn't have to take 20 years and 2 PhDs. You can feel however you want about Chris Ferris. He's certainly changed a lot over the years. But one of his earliest messages was that he believed in cramming and the power of cramming a lot of effort into a serious period of time and taking it really seriously, and that yielding something that wasn't fake. And I have to concur with that. And so, and it does, and he does a lot with manifesting, or the core tenets of manifesting, which it sounds like you very much so here executed here. And one of them is this like blind understanding that that is going to be your reality. And I love that because I feel like that's what it would take, you know. And honestly, I don't know if I'm getting old. I'm 43, and I don't know if I'm just getting geriatric, but like I'm like a young woman in 2011 in a van driving through states, you know, going to who knows where on what knows route at what time of day, getting vegan food. But in all reality, I think that the manifesting is kind of probably what made it so amazing. So I have my top 3 questions when I heard about the adventure. I'm always like, what was my first 3 questions? I want to know, back in 2011, it was totally different, as you mentioned, with the social media game, every way that I would find information now off the table. So I want to know how you curated your list. Did you just hit like the web? Like, how did you find the first places you wanted to go? And did you map out your quest before you went, knowing which states, or did you kind of just say, yeah, here we come, Connecticut? Like, how did that work out?
Now that I think about it, I got pretty lucky in that I had a direct line somehow, and maybe I just emailed them too, but I had a direct line to the founder of Happy Cow,
Okay.
which is, for those of you who may not know, it's an app that allows you to search for vegan food pretty much anywhere in the world now. Like they're pretty all encompassing, and it's considered one of the more comprehensive vegan restaurant apps or food search apps out there now. And so at the time, I had emailed with Eric, the founder of the app, and he sent me a spreadsheet of all of the vegan restaurants that they knew of in the United States. So I initially, I was like hyper planning everything, right? Like because I also had collected donations. I did a crowdfunding campaign to buy the van and to get started. So I wanted to make sure that I was tracking everything and showing up in the way that I promised people I would use their money, right? So in the beginning, I was like, okay, I'm starting in the Northeast. What makes sense? I'll go up to Maine and start working my way down. So essentially, it ended up looking like this zigzag up and down the country. And I would usually plan like a state or 2 ahead. So if I was in New York, you know, I would say, okay, Connecticut or New Hampshire, whatever's next on the list. And I would sit down, look at the Happy Cow list, and I would also check Yelp, and I think I started using the Facebook page I had created for the project as well, We'll Travel for Vegan Food on Facebook. I started using that to also ask people of places. So I kind of have this like 3 or 4 point series that I would curate all of the resources I could conjure up to find what existed in that time frame for a vegan restaurant. And it had to be 100% vegan because there were so many vegetarian, vegan-friendly places, right, even then, that it would have taken too long. I did make a few exceptions along the way, like really popular places like, at the time, the Chicago Diner in Chicago wasn't 100% vegan, but I was gonna go because it was a famous, like long-term vegan, vegetarian restaurant. So to answer your question, I did have some help in the beginning between Happy Cow and then kind of outsourcing as well to find out where these places were. And then I would usually plan a state or 2 ahead, depending on how big or comprehensive the state was in terms of what it provided. Like California took a really long freaking time to plan. Like I was planning per county or city there, not by the whole state, because there was so much there. But then of course, Delaware, I think, had 0 vegan options. So like, well, you know what? I'm going to be traveling through this way anyway. I'm going to stop at a cafe, get a coffee, can say I was in Delaware. I'll keep moving on. So I would use that opportunity to sit and like write a blog post about the previous place I'd gone to or something like that.
So what was the criteria? Did you have a boilerplate that you guaranteed your audience that you would use metrics, like these 4 core tenets that you were going to measure that place against? And also, what determined what you ordered? And did you notify the people that you were coming ahead of time, that you were writing this blog, so that they could kind of present you with their best and at show? Or how did all of that work?
Yeah, the first few months were definitely more organized in that way before the undertaking became almost too much to do, right? I feel like toward the end I was barely keeping up with everything, but in the beginning, yes, I was notifying everyone about what I was doing. I wasn't ever asking for anything because I was being, already funded by the donors, so I wasn't expecting or asking for free food or anything like that. Occasionally, the restaurants might throw in a dessert or something. But to answer the other parts of your question, I, aside from notifying them ahead of time, which I did in the beginning, not so much the second half of the trip, because it became very time consuming, but I didn't necessarily have a point system to say, here's the type of place I'll go to. It just had to be fully vegan, or at least mostly vegan. And in terms of what I ordered, it was really just whatever I felt like having. I remember consciously, again, in the beginning, trying to change up the things. Like if I was going to a restaurant that had a specialty cuisine or something of that nature, I would try to order something I'd never had before. And that actually became a game as I went on with myself, where it's like, can I find something new on this menu? Because there were several Asian American vegan restaurants around that after a while I was like, okay, I've had a lot of this food.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I was just really lucky that the people that showed up in support, whether it was monetarily or just cheering me on along the way through social media or emails, no one seemed to care too much about that part of it. They just wanted to see me keep going and to accomplish the mission.
So I'm curious, because you have this like incredible punctuated moment, in 2011. You have this very crisp and clear view of what the United States kind of on the whole was offering with the scene of vegan food. Can you kind of describe what it was like back then? Because it's changed so much. One of the points that everyone in the vegan community, from health and wellness to fashion, agrees upon is that the scene is simply blown up since you've done this endeavor. And I was so excited to speak with you because your bird's eye view of this moment was prior to this kind of blow up, in my eyes, of where it's become very normal to have vegan. I mean, every restaurant I go to has gluten-free and vegan options, and they state it clearly. They denote it. In 2011, no way. It simply wasn't happening. And so I'm curious if you can kind of describe for us the vegan scene as you recall it and you remember in going through the United States, and what the restaurants like. There was a rockabilly moment. Remember when everything was, and that's maybe a term that people hate, or it's just this colloquial term that came out. But the only people I knew in 2011 that were vegan were also kind of these like Betty Boop type characters. And, the guys all looked like greasers from the 60s. And that was like a large part of the vegan community that I could hang out with in Seattle. And so that's like my experience of it. What was your take on it? Like, what was your experience for like the community of what vegan was back in 2011?
Yeah, it was easier to categorize, if you will, in terms of, you still had kind of the hippie,
Yeah.
Birkenstock wearing hippies that were maybe more notable or recognizable, as some may have seen it that way. So there was definitely that kind of, and then I also found that the punk rock community, which I would never claim to be a part of, but I've met so many vegans who became vegan through the punk or hard punk, I don't know what the exact category is, screamy music, metal, I don't know, but they came up through the bands that were kind of leading the voice around veganism at the time. And so for me, I was learning a lot more in terms of from those people who were being influenced by musicians, by other kind of more empathetic, compassionate people in the world, which I would qualify under that like hippy dippy space.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of the restaurant scene itself, it was certainly not as common. And of course, it probably even reflective of it as it is today in some ways, where when you're in the bigger cities, it's far and away easier to find stuff than if you're kind of in the middle of nowhere. I think it's still relatively like that now. However, there's more awareness. There's more digital conversation happening around veganism now. So it may not be as shocking to someone if you ask them for oat milk as it would have been 10 years ago. but yeah, it's definitely evolved in terms of general awareness and the type of people that you may find. Like, I don't know that there is a type anymore. You might not be able to identify a vegan walking down the street now unless they have, a face tattoo that says they're vegan or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I still love those cats too. But yeah, it's unlikely vegans. We've got a whole bunch of dark passengers, which I love. I'm wondering, so my identification with the vegan community back in 2011 was very much so, as far as location and geography within the cities that they were nestled in vegan joints, was very much so built around the regentrification of certain areas. And so they were largely in like what was termed like up and coming neighborhoods, which usually mixed them in with like the artistic communities and things of that nature. Did you find that to be true over the United States, or was it not only necessarily true in the larger cities, or did you find certain states that broke that type or stereotype, or is that completely incorrect?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've never thought about it in that way, but as you were talking, I absolutely remember, particularly in the larger cities like Chicago, Seattle, LA, California as a whole may have been an exception to that in terms of veganism being more accessible and more commonly known statewide versus in the larger cities. But yes, I would say, especially in the rural areas, it was more you would find that one and only restaurant, kind of vegan option restaurant, kind of in a place that wasn't as populated or like dense city wise. And then in the larger city, it was the opposite. It was where there was some gentrification happening or development around like the cool stuff coming. So it's kind of a mix, I guess, now that I'm saying it out loud and trying to think through it out loud. But yeah, it was a little bit of a mix. I don't know that I saw a hard trend one way or another in a particular city or state, though.
Awesome. Do you remember what was your favorite, like in the top 5? I mean, you did it for so long, and I wonder if it was just like, well, it was one of the last 20 that I had, or did you ever bite into something that you were like, this is crazy, this is the future of like where vegan restaurants should be headed, or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the chapters in my book, I wrote a memoir about this journey, and one of the chapters is all about a restaurant called Veg in Philadelphia. At the time, it was one of the first kind of fine dining. You needed to book months out, which I think is still the case. Well, who knows today in the age of COVID? I don't know what they're doing, but pre-COVID, we had, you had to book out months in advance to eat there. And at the time that I had the pleasure of eating there, I think their wait list was only a couple weeks long, and then it turned into a few months long. But it was one of the first fully vegan fine dining restaurants in the country. And I still remember biting into a carrot and thinking, like, how is this carrot so flavorful? And I don't know what they did to it. I mean, here's the other thing. I may have eaten a lot of vegan food in my life, or gone out to eat a lot, I should say, but I'm not a cook. I'm not passionate about cooking. I don't know a lot about cooking. This is a new thing that I've had to learn how to do since landing in one place this past year. But yeah, Veg was a memorable dining experience for the food specifically, because when you go to, it's a fully immersive experience typically, right? You're experiencing the service and the aesthetic of a place and the company that you're in, but in that moment it was just about the food, and it was absolutely exquisite. It was amazing.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, Veg had a cult following. I never ate there, and I heard about it nonstop as a vegan from non-vegans. They were like, Veg in Philadelphia. So I still need to get there. I'm wondering, I've seen a transition in the time that even prior to being vegan, I was vegetarian for years, but I saw a transition in vegan food that was kind of taking it, to use your phrase, like from this hippy dippy, like there was an overuse of maybe certain ingredients that people didn't like the taste of or didn't identify with. It was kind of its own cuisine. There was like a flavor that certain vegans really loved, and if you weren't vegan, you may or may not like it. And then it started to kind of branch into just this food, just this all industry, not necessarily hearkening to like the wheat meat and everything that they seem to lean on in the past. That's my own personal take on it. I'm wondering, since 2011 up to now, 2020, of June of 2020, what are some of the fundamental differences that you've noticed regarding the transition from vegan cuisine from when you were on the road to now?
I think you're definitely onto something there in the way you're describing it, in that it's less about being a standalone type of cuisine, like let's go get vegan food, and it's more today, let's go get tacos at this restaurant which happens to be vegan, right? Like here in Vegas where I am right now, there's an amazing Mexican restaurant that happens to be all vegan. There's a few Asian fusion restaurants that happen to be vegan. There's even that trend of the dining in the dark. There's one of those restaurants here that happens to be all vegan, right? So I think one of the bigger shifts that I've noticed has been more in, it's less about the aesthetic of being vegan and more about how it's the quality of the food. Like we're going to get burgers or hot dogs or whatever from this place, and it happens to be a vegan establishment. So that's one thing. And I think in terms of the larger scope of, like, economically speaking, even what we're seeing, this shift in these companies that are being bought out by larger conglomerates, right? Dairy and faux meat companies, which I think is, you may find big, experience mixed feelings from vegans on that. But from my perspective, I think it's an indication of the trend moving out of trendy into practical, right? Like these businesses are identifying that vegan food is not a one and done thing. It's here to stay. It's growing. It's becoming a way to address environmental impact of factory farming and all of these other pieces, right, that we could get into in a whole other thing. But I think there's something really cool happening when we start to see these bigger companies identifying that there's money to be made in these vegan or cruelty-free products, and they're moving their money toward it, right? So I think that's a huge and amazing indication of how much progress has been made in the last decade.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that end, I wonder, because it is your specialty with marketing and copywriting and what you're doing right now with all of your endeavors, I feel like the voice around vegan food in particular and the vegan products industry and things like that, namely with terms like plant-based and things like that, like people are starting to adapt to a vegan tonality in particular with, I think being health conscious and environmentally friendly, obviously with the COVID-19 pandemic upon us, is crucial, but it was becoming crucial prior to the pandemic. It seemed like people were adopting plant-based, and this is to the chagrin of a lot of vegans. There are a ton of people that did not want that association, do not appreciate that. There are a lot of people that are identifying with being plant-based that are not even remotely vegan, and they're not good for you. They're not organic, So there's that. It's like being fortified with vitamins back in the 90s. Like, why? Who? What did you strip of it to have to do that? But I'm wondering for you, from a copyright standpoint, from like the marketing standpoint, what do you see some of like the key terms around even like the vegan community? PETA's voice, for instance, has changed a great deal when they talk about products, as well as mainstream, as you're mentioning some of these other, KFC is offering a vegan option, ironically, now, but I mean, and that's, that's a whole nother debate I'm not entering into right here with you. But I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to the tonality or to some of the changes that you've seen as a writer, or where you think that people are headed with the writing about food, about products, about any of that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely this is maybe a more subtle shift, especially if you're deep inside of the vegan community, if you will, in terms of how it's being presented in grocery stores or at vegan friendly establishments, where it is more of the element of, we're talking plant-based. You'll certainly find the word vegan in a lot more places than you would have a decade ago, but I think there is more of a movement around calling things plant-based or even faux. Seems to be continuing to pick up versus an all-encompassing vegan, because of course there is, we look at veganism, we may look at it as a lifestyle versus a dietary choice, right? So I think that's probably why these bigger companies too are trying to be more, well, I would assume that they're trying to capture a larger audience, not just the vegans, right? So they're going to use plant-based or chicken in quotes, something like that. But I don't think that we've really landed on, and I say we, just like consumers in general, or how these companies are producing or marketing these products. I don't think we've really landed on how it needs to look yet or sound in order to attract a wider scope of people. I think there's still you'll find even within each of the companies that are producing different products, they're very specific in their language, and some of them are full on, like, let's talk about animal cruelty or how it affects the environment. And then you'll have others who you wouldn't even know it's a vegan company or product at all because they're trying to avoid any association with that. So I don't know that there has been like a streamlined message yet for it. I think it's still so kind of reaching different people and different areas that it's still a little scattered. So I don't know if I really answered your question on that one. I think
no, you did. I think you're right. I think it is still very much so being defined, which is exciting. You know, I like being on that flagship. I don't think having everything concrete isn't that great. And I think that part of the vegan motion and movement, you know, with food and the entire world, as you said, it's very all encompassing. And that's what, you know, this podcast seeks to endeavor, is to kind of unpack the myriad of angles that the vegan term is used, but it is still it's defining itself. It's redefining itself. The pandemic is causing it to redefine itself. It's very interesting in that, to that end. And on a personal note, I kind of want to wrap up everything today with an inquiry based on, if I might be so bold as to ask you, do you have future endeavors to kind of circle back and do anything like what you did with Will Travel for Vegan Food on a writing endeavor? Or are you using any of your current marketing and copywriting specialties towards or looking at the vegan lens or angle in food ever again?
Yeah, speaking of not landing in a certain at a certain place, I would say that question is still floating around for me. I was very fortunate in when the road trip ended and when I started working on the memoir, that my business development and marketing business kind of sprung organically, in that people were reaching out and saying, how can I quit my job and travel? How can I start my own business? And thankfully, with my background in my formal education paired with this now life experience that I had, and having dabbled in a few developing my own businesses even before quitting my job and doing all these things, it was like the perfect combination for starting what had turned into the business that I have now. And that's continued to evolve, much like the vegan movement and the language that we're speaking around. It initially started as this marketing and business development consulting with small, typically female vegan business owners. That was my primary demographic early on. And that started shifting into working with some corporations, nonprofits. It really kind of went all over the place. I had also, since I was still traveling, and then one in that around the world trip in 2016, which was sponsored by a vegan travel company, I was kind of splitting my time between creating visual content and videos for that company, and then also managing my business. So I would say, to answer your question, bringing it back to now, my company has been in all different directions in terms of who I serve and how I do that, which I've been very fortunate to have such a wide variety of clientele and the types of work. But then this past year, in 2019, I wound up back in upstate New York where my parents are, because my dad had gotten cancer, and I decided to hang there since it had been such a while since I'd been home for an extended period of time. And side note, he's doing phenomenally well. He's great. He's great today. So I landed there and thought, okay, I really need to double down on what my business is going to be like. And that's when I started kind of honing in more on the copywriting, and because of the marketing background, it just became like a nice combo of people that needed support with their online communications, and also maybe with the undertone of like, what does this look like for promoting and marketing my business as well. So to answer your question, I think it's really been, I would love to work with vegan brands, and I have most of my clients have come through vegan channels in one way or another. They don't necessarily have a food product or are in that realm, but it's certainly, especially as I'm developing out the copywriting portion of my business, it is something that I'm more conscious of, because I love writing about food. I love food. I'd be happy to help with product descriptions and web content and email marketing and all of that jazz. That is totally up my alley. So I think eventually, definitely the top of my mind. I'm not focusing my energies on that specifically right now, but it's certainly not off the table.
Awesome. That's great. And nothing should be. I think that's fantastic. And it's a great response, because it's honest, right? I love that. Well, Kristin, thank you so much for speaking with us today. We're out of time. I could talk with you forever about your experiences. But I really appreciate you giving us your time today. I know everyone is at once home, but twice as busy. And I really do appreciate you telling us your story and your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Absolutely. For everyone listening, we've been speaking with Kristin Lajeunesse. She's an author and marketing and copywriting specialist. You can find out more about what we were talking about, WTFveganfood.com. That stands for Will Travel for veganfood.com, as well as www.kristinlajeunesse.com. That is KristinLajeunesse.com. Thank you for giving us your time today. And until we speak again next time, remember to stay safe, eat well, and always bet on yourself. Sluncha.